Thank you. Recently, we decided we needed to get a car, so we traded in one of our vehicles and got a car, and we got it for the safety features was one of the big things. It's got so many safety features. But I've learned that the safety features like to fight me. The car now fights me. It's really cool because when you're on the interstate, it's not just cruise control. You know, when you hit the cruise control, you go at the same speed, but you got to pay attention because if the car in front of you is going slower, the car automatically slows to the speed of the car in front of me. And I have to be aware that all of a sudden I've slowed 10 or 15 miles per hour down because the car at that speed, and then when you go to the left lane, it kind of guns it and takes you back up to the speed. It's also with the cruise control, you're driving and it knows where the lanes are on each side. So if you get close enough to the lines on the side, you get beeped at. Holly turned it off before we even drove home. And then it's got a feature to tell you if somebody's in the back seat, they jump out of the car and they go in, I turn off the car, and then a warning light comes on and says, make sure you check the back seat. I guess that's so you don't leave any children in the back seat on a hot day or something like that. And that's pretty cool. But here's the safety feature that really got to me. When I drive home, I time it perfectly, so as the garage door is going up, I just slide right in, and instead of waiting out there, but it doesn't like that, so it beeps at me for a while, and then as I'm going in, it has an emergency braking system that slams on the brakes and doesn't let you move until it sees the obstruction is out of the way. Now, it's not a self-driving car, but it's got a lot of features that make it a little difficult. And there is a day where we might not have to know how to drive. We might have that self-driving feature where you can fall asleep. Now, mine will beep at me, like it'll keep it on the road, on the highway, so I took my hands off just to see what it's doing, but it beeps at you to keep your hands on the wheel, just in case it falls asleep and drives off the road. Sometimes in our faith, we think we have a self-driving vehicle. We sit around and expect God to do everything. And then when it doesn't happen like we want, we say, God, why didn't you take care of that for me? When we got to realize that God is calling us in to participate with Him, to be a part of a calling, to be a part of an awesome covenant that we have with God in Jesus Christ. As we continue in our sermon series called God's Great Stewards, becoming Abraham and becoming Sarah, we're looking at where their actual covenant takes place. When we look at the covenant, this is kind of the core. This is what everything is built around. This is why Abram and Sarai left and why they become Abraham and Sarah. And this covenant didn't come on when they wanted it. It came when God wanted it. But God, remember His first call to Abram was just go to the place I'm sending you. And we'll fill in the details later. That's a lot of faith. When we look at Genesis 15, we're going to look at verses 1 through 21 and see the actual covenant take place between God and Abram. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, you have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be their heir. The word of the Lord came to him, this man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. In case you didn't wonder, he's telling him this when Sarai is 90 years old. He took him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. He also said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land and take possession of it. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? So the Lord said to him, bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Abram brought out all these to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. The birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. When the sun had set and the darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, to your descendants I give you this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. The word of God for the people of God. Amen. Again, how many of you are thankful I didn't ask you to read that for me this morning? When we don't use our talents and our resources to bless others, we miss out on the covenant promises of God. Now, a covenant, as you may know, is like a contract. It's a promise. And another word for covenant, does anybody else know another word for covenant besides the retired pastor that's in the Bible? There's an old one and a new one. Testament. Testament is a word for covenant. Will and, my final will and testament. It is a promise or something that is stated where you testify as to what will happen. Now, a covenant that happened in the ancient Middle East was something like this. You would take the animals, the sacrificial animals, and divide them, and they would go on each side. And the two people making the covenant would walk through there together. Now, a covenant had a couple of things that had to come with it. One was blood. Blood was symbolic of life. And when there was life involved, when you're walking through there, it's almost like saying, we're going to do life together. Like a marriage covenant. We're going to do life together on this, whatever this contract is we have. We are going to covenant together to make it right. Now, you do that together, but when this happened to Abram, notice it was the flame who was, does anybody know who the flame, fire, God, anybody? God? It was God. And God did it alone without Abram, because he caught Abram at a state where Abram was. So God made the covenant himself for Abram and Sarai and said, I will make this happen. The promise comes from God alone. But Abram is at this state. Remember, it was like when Moses was called, he had a bunch of excuses. I don't talk well enough. I'm not the right person. Nobody likes me. Whatever he had, it was just all these excuses. And then similarly, when God made the covenant with Moses, he stuck him in the crack of a rock, and then he came by, and Moses got to see God's glory. And that was the covenant, the Mosaic covenant they had. With the Abrahamic covenant, God made the covenant, and Abraham witnessed to it, but then he and Sarai were asked to participate in that covenant and be stewards of that covenant. When you think about a covenant like that, Al Jansen wrote an article called The Marriage Masterpiece, especially encouraging men on how important the wedding vows are. He said, I am struck as I reflect on the vows Joe and I took as we exchanged at our wedding by the one-sidedness of our commitment. As I reflect on the vows, I remember there were no qualifiers, there were no disclaimers. I promised to love her for better or for worse until death, regardless of her actions and attitudes. Likewise, Joe promised to have me for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, for life, regardless of how well or poorly I behaved. No doubt we both assumed we'd reciprocate in our love for each other. However, our vows said nothing about being loved back. Did anybody say anything like that? I promise to do this as long as I like what you're doing, as long as I'm happy with you. He says, by our words, each of us assumed 100% responsibility for the marriage. That's the nature of the covenant. Each party takes an irrevocable vow. Likewise, when a husband places a wedding ring on his wife's finger in the traditional marriage service, he says, with this ring I thee wed, and my body I thee serve, and with all my worldly goods I thee endow. In other words, the husband gave everything he had to his wife, including his body and his earthly possessions. No longer were they his possessions or her possessions. Everything was theirs. Why is this important? Jansen says, because in giving our all, we actually gain what we want. Now, in the covenant with God, with Abram and Sarai, who were soon to become Abraham and Sarah, as we'll see next week. On their journey, it says he believed God and participated in the covenant promises. Now, sometimes when I think about participation, it reminds me of when Christopher was like 5 years old and he was playing soccer. And at the end of the season, they always, whatever league you're in, they always have medals for everyone on the team. But the coach on the team went this extra step, and they didn't only get medals, but they all actually got trophies. I thought that was the coolest gift. He went and got them each a trophy with his own money, and it was so cool. And recently, we were cleaning stuff out, and Christopher said, I don't need that trophy anymore. And I said, why? That's your soccer trophy. And he knew as he got older that was just a participation trophy. Literally a participation trophy for playing soccer. So it wasn't like special, like if they won the league or something like that. Sometimes when we think of participation in our faith, we think we just come here, we clock in, we punch our cards, we do our time, we say our things, we move forward in life, and we think, okay, if I spend time in prayer, if I do this and I do this, and we miss out on the promises that God has for us, that the covenant we have in Jesus Christ draws us into a relationship with God and a relation that spills out to one another, that life can be exciting as a follower of Jesus Christ if we don't just go for the participation trophy, but we listen to God and we follow God and we find out what the covenant promises are for us. You see, our participation is, we talked about this a few weeks ago, Psalm 24:1 says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it." So all we have is already God's. So how can we use everything we have and dedicate it to God to glorify God? Abram in Genesis 15:6, it's really cool. It says, Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Now, sometimes in our faith walk, we think of saying, do you believe in God? Or do you believe in Jesus? Now, even in the New Testament, when you look at the Greek, it says something might be a little deeper than that. I mean, James says even the demons believe in God and they shudder, but they don't trust in him. They don't follow him. The Greek can be interpreted in the New Testament and the Hebrew here in the Old Testament more of as believing on God, standing on the promises, trusting in God, knowing who you believe in, and when you stand on that solid rock, then we can step forward in faith and we can participate in the covenant promises. Believe in God and participate in the kingdom promises by sacrificially giving of your talents and of your resources. Now we're going to give you an opportunity to sing about, do we know who we believe in?